Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everyone. I am so delighted to introduce today's guest, Dr. Michelle K. Johnston. Michelle is a management professor, executive coach, and leadership expert who serves as the Gaston Chair of Business at Loyola University New Orleans. Michelle recently published her new book, The Seismic Shift in Leadership: How to Thrive in a New Era of Connection, which is now an Amazon bestseller. She was named one of the most influential New Orleans, a top 500 business leader, and a Woman of the Year by City Business. Michelle is a celebrated keynote speaker presenting at conferences and events nationwide. She received her PhD in communication from Louisiana State University and was named to the prestigious 100 Coaches group, which consists of the top executive coaches worldwide. She lives in her beloved city of New Orleans, Louisiana, with her daughter, Elizabeth. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michelle K. Johnston. Welcome, Michelle.
Oh, Tammy, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
So, as you know, Michelle, on Work from the Inside Out, we like to begin at the beginning and talk a little bit about the formative years and how those came to be in terms of where you are today and how those may or may not have influenced you. So take us back to those early years.
Absolutely. I just gave a big presentation up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to all these newspaper executives. And it was interesting. We began with this exercise of owning your story. And what was interesting to me is so many of us in that room had similar upbringings, either military brats or corporate brats. So I fall in the latter category. And I grew up moving around every 2 years. My father worked for General Motors. He was in the finance division. And so we moved all around, and I thought life was quite an adventure. And he always made it fun, and new friends and new schools and new restaurants, new cultures. And I really loved it. It was a very exciting life growing up. And it ended up kind of biting me in the butt once I was in my 20s trying to establish myself, because what I didn't realize is that I had just gotten quite too good at fitting in. And when I lifted my head up, I just kept fitting in and fitting in and fitting in. But here I was, a brand new professor in the College of Business at Loyola. And I looked around and all I did was try to fit in rather than really trying to find my voice and own my superpowers and my strengths and bring my talents into the classroom. And so it took me a number of years to really get comfortable in my own skin and give myself permission to show up as I truly am.
Wow. So that is really, really interesting. So I'm curious that, first of all, when I've heard other people talk about their early lives and they moved around a lot of times they talk about, feeling like they never quite fit in anywhere and all that. So it's refreshing to hear sort of a different path that,
That's a really good point.
Yeah. That they always felt like they were the new kid and they had trouble not knowing where they fit in. And so it's refreshing to hear that kind of reframe, not that one's right or wrong or otherwise, but that it sounds like your dad also helped reframe that for you, that, oh, this is part of the adventure, right?
You know what? Gosh, I learned early on, it's all about the framing of the situation, right? And how you sell it and how you make it an adventure. And he was a great leader. And that's the reason why he got transferred every 2 years. Back then, big companies like General Motors, whenever you got a promotion, they did not want you to manage the people you were just on a team with. And so they gave you the market. And so we ate dinner together as a family every single night, no matter how long his commute was from New York City D.C. or from Detroit. We lived outside of lots of big cities. No matter how far and how long the commute was, we did eat dinner as a family. My mother was a great corporate wife. She loved moving around and loved hearing about his job, and so did I. And I was fascinated to hear about leadership and motivation and team dynamics. And so you had mentioned, so many kids who grow up moving around see themselves on the outside. I didn't feel like I was on the outside, although I was on the outside every 2 years. I got pretty good at finding a group and making friends. And I think that perspective, though, of being on the outside really helped me, which I ultimately got my PhD and became a professor and was just fascinated with organizational culture, organizational communication, and leadership. And I think that outsider's view really did help to look at culture and all of those dynamics. I still find it fascinating today.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a PhD at Georgetown and was an author of books on housing for the poor. And so I'm from Washington, D.C. And so grew up with that influence. So when I finished my master's degree at Auburn, he was very excited that I was getting a graduate degree and decided to continue his letter writing campaign of why I should get a PhD. And at that point in my life, I thought, why in the world would I want to get a PhD? I just wrote my master's thesis. I'm good. And he was he was dedicated to his mission. And so he persuaded me, and I ended up getting my PhD at LSU. And I'm so glad I did, because the lens that I use to view the world really is from this lens of kind of studying ecosystems and studying organizations and leadership styles, and trying to dissect what does it take to be successful right now. And that's why I wrote the book, The Seismic Shift in Leadership, because it is a seismic shift. It's a huge seismic shift in everything, not just professionally, but personally, how we show up, how we want to show up, and how we create positive work environments where people can thrive. So that's my mission now. And it's a really an exciting time.
Well, and you have so much to reflect on from your own life to bring to that, and that kind of curiosity. I can imagine having lived in a number of different places, and then, kind of almost honing those powers of observation. I'm curious. So your master's degree, was that also in communication?
Everything was in communication. My dad, all he told me when I started college was, you got to be a business major. You got to be a business major. And I lasted one semester. And the irony is that I teach in the College of Business. I lasted one semester, and I was just so fascinated with communication. So I ended up with public relations and journalism. And then I went back. My master's was in communication, and then my PhD in communication. I always just had that fascination with how individuals communicate to achieve success.
Wow. Oh, that's really neat. So when you finished your PhD, did you go right into the academic world?
Boy, you ask good questions, Tammy. No. So what's interesting is I really had to pivot at that time. When I was in my master's program, I took a class. I think it was called Small Group Leadership. And the professor was a president of a consulting firm based in New Orleans. And I loved this class. It was only on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so he could fly out of town and go down to New Orleans and do all of his consulting. And he taught the class in a very experiential way. His name was Larry Barker. May he rest in peace. And he was the author of hundreds of textbooks and books, all on communication. He was the most prolific communication scholar there was, as a matter of fact. And so here he brought in all of these real world scenarios. And I made an appointment with him in his office. I said, could I please be an intern at your consulting firm? And he said, absolutely. And I fell in love. So the whole time I was getting my PhD, so I was in graduate school my entire 20s and working for the consulting firm. And I was going all over the region, delivering workshops on meeting management, team skills, listening, presentation skills. I loved it because I was also a graduate teaching assistant. So I was teaching huge classes in public speaking and interpersonal communication. So it was all really interspersed or interplayed out. It was just it was very simpatico, shall we say. So I did not think I would ever be a professor. I always thought that I was going to be a management consultant. And then when I got married and started thinking about having a family, I was on an airplane all the time. Pfizer was a big client of ours in New York. And so I was traveling a lot. And I was teaching a class, business communication, in the business school at Loyola at night, one night a week, and the dean heard about it and he offered me a full-time job. And he said, I want to make it mandatory. At the time, it was just this elective. He goes, I want to make it mandatory for every business major, and I want you to be full-time and teach it. And I said, sold. So here I was, not expecting it at all. And I was an academic, and now I've been at Loyola for over 20 years.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm curious too. I do this a lot with my guests where they'll keep, because they're so connected to their own life, they jump ahead, and I'm like, wait, I still want to go back to the other thing you said before. I was thinking about you being in grad school and getting your doctorate, and you were teaching and you were working at the consulting firm. And I'm curious if some of those dinner table conversations, like reflecting on the times when your dad would come home and talk about things at work, and how any of that sort of layered over some of the experiences you might have had with clients at the consulting firm or things like that, if those stories.
Absolutely. I mean, who knew how much those dinner conversations, that should be my next book, Dinner with Dad.
Yeah.
How much those dinner conversations would really play out in a very positive way. What also was quite fascinating is when I started writing my book, The Seismic Shift, based on, as an executive coach, what I was seeing, that so many of my clients who were subscribing to that old style command and control, more kind of like a toxic work environment, jerk boss, those individuals were getting pushed out of organizations. And so I wanted to figure out, with my researcher's mind, well, then what is going to be the new model of success? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And then I started hearing and realizing it was all about connection. And then I wanted to deconstruct connection. And so then I went and interviewed 18 leaders, and I put this book together. And Tammy, it wasn't until my book launch party, and my dad is there. He's 77 years old, and he's there. And I'm giving my speech about the seismic shift, and I'm thanking people. And I said, and I realized, Dad, after I did all the research and interviewed all the people, that basically I wrote a book about your leadership.
Yeah.
He was a trailblazer. Back then, it was not cool to lean in with kindness and create this positive workplace. At General Motors, it was very much old school command and control, hierarchical, bureaucratic, and just, I don't even think they knew his boss knew his name. He said, and if he did, he just got it confused all the time. and so you didn't feel back then like you had a voice, or you should speak up, or it was this, work was work.
Exactly.
And so work was work. And I just love it that, in 2023, after all these years, we finally are at a place where we're like, no, we want more out of work. We spend so much time with these people and in these spaces, and so much of our identity is tied to it. Let's create positive work environments where there aren't jerk bosses. It's not toxic. It's actually good for your health. It's not bad for your health. And so I just love it. You're right, Tammy. You really honed in on that. I just love it that my dad had such a positive impact on me and my work.
And I'm really, really appreciating what you're saying about it's okay. It's okay to love your work and to make it integral to your life and to have that be part of your identity. I think that more old school kind of attitude was work is work and life is life. And when you come home at night, you leave your work at the door, and everything needs to be so distinct and separate. And I think that there were a lot of people who were raised to believe that. So when they started to find that their work was, kind of pouring over into the rest of their life, for some people, not everybody, it's like, oh, is this okay? I don't know. Does this mean I'm getting burnt out? What does that mean? And I think that what I'm really appreciating about your work and your book is that you're really, you're bridging those gaps and showing how they can really work beautifully together, rather than having this need to separate everything out.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because yes, and in addition to everything you just said, Tammy, besides work is work and then life is life, there are many, many leaders who thought that they couldn't be themselves at work, that they had to bring just their professional self to work. And then the minute they walked in the door, they could be their real selves. And what I found is that quest for perfection, that like perfect professional self, perfection equals disconnection. So when I was conducting all these interviews to find out what connection was, I learned a whole lot about what disconnection was. And perfection equals disconnection. So we're not putting up with those sorts of not just leaders, but employees anymore who come to work with their mask on, their mask of perfection. And yet you see them at the grocery store or somewhere on the little league field on the weekends. And you're like, oh, actually, I like this person. Why aren't you bringing that person into the office?
Exactly.
Right. I want us to be able to embrace our whole selves. And I'm not talking about, authenticity gets really muddled. I'm not talking about self-disclosure, vulnerability gets muddled. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm saying just knowing yourself so that you can be a real person, allow other people to be real people, and just let's stop putting on acts.
Right. And I think that there's a key in there, and that is knowing yourself and being able to make choices about what parts of yourself that you can bring to add strengths to what you're doing. And that's I think it's key in leadership, right?
Yes, to really know yourself. So the exercise, as I just shared, I just did with these newspaper executives is, what is the significant life event that made you the leader you are today? And how did you grow? And just watching them, there were 25 leaders, and it took us an hour and a half to get through for each of them sharing their story and what they learned about themselves and giving themselves permission then to lead more with compassion. And, they were just absolutely beautiful stories. So you do that exercise to connect with yourself and figure out what is my brand and how do I want to show up every day? And you do that exercise to build trust within the team, because so many people looked around and said, now I really understand you all. I've been working with you for a decade and now I get you. Because you don't usually share those significant stories and life events, just randomly or organically in the workplace. But an exercise like this that says we want each of you 25 executives to share your stories was so powerful, and it really built that psychological safety that companies need right now in order to be innovative. So that's what every company is telling me now, right? We've got to push through. We've got to do things differently. We've got to be innovative. Okay, then you have to embed time for connection. Like we just spent 3.5 hours together, and I'm sure they were looking at their Apple Watches going, boy, I have a lot to be doing than sitting here listening to each other's stories. And that is connection. That's building connection.
Right. And they know, I think afterwards they realize how impactful that actually was. I'm curious about the use of the term seismic. How did you come out? How did you come up with that for your book title? I'm always curious about book titles.
Yeah, seismic shift. I spent a lot of time with my friends over cocktails going, about this title. What do you think about this title? And at first it was the missing piece of leadership. And I spent at least a year absolutely convinced that was the title, even when everybody else was telling me it wasn't. And I moved on to the secret sauce of leadership, because I found that lots of people just wanted to know, what is the secret sauce? What is the secret sauce? But one of the leaders in my book is Todd Graves. And Todd Graves is the founder of Raising Cane's Chicken. He's now just global and huge and has his own A&E television show called Secret Sauce, because his whole differentiator was secret sauce. So I thought, okay, well, I can't take what ultimately will be Todd's book, which is going to be Secret Sauce. And then as I was having conversations with my content company, and they're the ones who do my audiobook and they do my podcast, we were just talking about this shift that I was seeing that I was writing about. It just cannot be that old style anymore. It's not effective for a myriad of reasons. And it's all about connection. And they said, there's a real seismic shift happening. I said, seismic shift is a way to describe it. And then it was like, ba-boom.
Yeah.
And then we thought a lightning bolt. And I was like, okay,
I love it.
It's a seismic shift that's happening. And then, oh, Tammy, you'll find this interesting. And then the book's about to go off to the publisher. I'm done. And it's March 2020. And the whole world shuts down. And I called my publisher and I said, I cannot publish a book on connection when for the first time the entire planet Earth is disconnected.
Oh my
How in
God.
the world? This is not going to fly. And I said, could you please give me time to go back and interview these executives and let's figure out how to connect in a disconnected world. So then when I published the book last year, we were all coming out of the pandemic wondering, how do we connect in a disconnected world? And I think that is why it's an Amazon bestseller. It was just the topic, and it was on top of mind.
And you just took the words out of my mouth, because I was going to ask you about, I want to say the unique times we're in, and they do feel unique. At the same time, we know that we go in and out of various periods of time where things happen, but this pandemic definitely, I think, caught many of us off guard and has put us through a time that many of us are still dealing with now. Even though a lot of things have opened up, many of us are still finding ourselves struggling with connection in certain ways. And I'm not even just talking about the things that are really obvious, like, do I go back to the office or don't I go back to the office? Is in person as important as it used to be? All of those sort of, operational pieces, but it runs a lot deeper than that. And I'm curious about, and I've been working with a lot of leaders myself around this and how it's changed the way they need to lead. And I'm curious, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So we just did an exercise. The last exercise we did with these newspaper executives was, okay, how do you create a culture of connection? And one of the first things they said was, we have to respect that employees still want flexibility, but we're going to have to make them come into the office. Yeah. Because how in the world do you have true, meaningful connection without having any face-to-face? So they agreed that they needed more face-to-face interaction, and people don't like more meetings. And so I said, well, we've got to reimagine how we work. And I talked about how years ago in academia and higher institutions of learning, they told us, whoever they was, we needed to flip the classroom, that all of a sudden the students had access to all this information that they hadn't had access to. We weren't the only experts in our field. We couldn't assume that. And we can't just walk in the classroom and lecture and expect them to learn. We've got to flip the classroom and make it so that when we walk into the classroom, we as professors create an environment of learning that is stimulating, that's engaging, that's experiential. So flip the classroom. So don't just walk in and lecture. Well, that's what I'm advocating now. Is leaders need to flip the workspace. They can't just walk in and expect that employees now will just go and sit behind their computer and meetings are just to update. We've got to reimagine, create environments where they want to come to work because it's all about collaboration and engagement. And then the days that they're home in their office or their home offices where they want that flexibility, then they can sit there the whole time behind their computer. So it's flipping the workspace, right? Another thing that emerged, this new way of work is they want more fun. And it kind of goes to what you and I were just saying, that it's no longer just work has to be work and play has to be play. Let's inject some levity and some humor, and let's have some social outings and fun. And they wanted to do field trips, and let's do exchanges with somebody who worked in where the newspapers are actually the press, where the newspapers are made. They're like, well, let's switch up for a day or two. Let's do this exchange thing. Let's get to know each other. And it's this desire, Tammy, now to really understand each other as full humans. That I don't know if that desire was there before. It really is a desire, like, let's get to know each other and what we value and what we bring to the table and what we do so that we can truly respect and collaborate and share. So it was super cool. But yeah, we're reimagining everything.
So, I'm thinking about reimagining things from the point of view of somebody who, remembers sort of the old school, or at least, came into the workforce while the old school, so to speak, was still there. And now, you're teaching, all kinds of other generations are coming up now. And I'm hearing from a lot of leaders that they are needing to navigate how to lead and how to work, how to connect with people of a whole variety of generations. And there's a tendency to want to kind of put them each in their own little silos and characterize them in certain ways. And yet it seems to me that there's lots of wiggle room amongst the generations, but I'm curious what your perspective is on that and how that has changed over the years that you've been teaching and the kinds of conversations you're having in the classroom.
Yeah.
And then also
Again,
in your private work.
Yeah, great question again, Tammy. Back in 2004, I launched the Executive Mentor Program at Loyola, and it was this mandatory course where we hooked up the brand new freshman business majors with executive mentors so that they could see the world of work. And we had a lot of goals. One, because many business majors just say, I'm a business major because my parents told me I had to be, and they didn't really understand what that was and the types of jobs and opportunities. And number two, we didn't want a brain drain in New Orleans. We wanted to keep the talent in New Orleans. So we thought it was a really good idea. So I launched this executive mentor program. I recruit these amazing executives, pair them up with these students. And I'll never forget the very first debrief we had after a successful first year. They said, these millennials, they want balance. They actually want to leave in the middle of the day and go to yoga. Are you kidding me? I remember that vividly, Tammy.
Yeah.
And I thought, and I was on their side because I was old school. I was like, what in the world? And I would go back to the students and say, what are you thinking? Work is work. You got to show up during the day, the hours. You can't just be in your own world with your earbuds on and leave to go get yoga. I mean, I was a part of I received the pushback from the mentors, and then I was a part of it. Like, what are you thinking, millennials? Well, you know what? I'm proud of them because it was them who said, we want to do things differently. We want to have more balance in our lives. We don't want to be like our parents. And so when I was teaching in Rome this summer, I was delivering a guest lecture on the seismic shift. And I said, I'm just curious, raise your hands if you remember growing up, the dinner table conversation, if you remember your parents having a jerk boss and that affecting your family and that absolutely affecting one of your parents' moods, which affected the dinner table, which affected your home life. 90% of them raised their hands and said, absolutely. And I said, yeah, I'm on a mission. No more jerk bosses. We have got to lead in a better way that creates, like I keep saying, workspaces where people actually want to show up to. And one of the things that these executives were saying today, one of the leaders was a trailblazer 25 years ago. She said, I had such a hard time having two children and being this managing editor of a newspaper that I ended up making my office like a playhouse. And I told my employees if they had kids that, had the day off, not sick kids, but bring them into my office. I've got toys. We're going to make this work for everybody. And I thought, gosh, what a trailblazer. Back then that was just so foreign. You were supposed to almost pretend like you didn't have children and they were never sick, and now I see the men and the women and, we've got to figure out how I can go see a little league game without having to lie and say I have a doctor's appointment.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing how things have changed. So what would be a key piece of advice that you might give today's leaders who are still trying to make that adjustment amongst the generations? Because I see a lot of them struggling with this.
Yeah. I think flexibility is key. I think rather than managing the clock and people's time, you manage their output. And if they can reach their goals on their terms, as long as they show up for the quarterly meetings or the weekly mandatory meetings, as long as they show up when they need to show up and they have the output and they're achieving and exceeding their goals, then I think that flexibility is key for you to retain the type of worker who is demanding those types of things. Yeah. Telling us in the great resignation, the great reevaluation, the great reprioritization, employees spoke very loudly about what they wanted. They wanted flexibility. They wanted work that was meaningful. They wanted to have purpose. They wanted to feel good about what they were doing. So that's my first piece of advice, flexibility. My second piece of advice for young new leaders is make sure that you embed time to connect because of this hybrid work environment. Connection times are just not organically happening anymore. And so like this 3.5 hour meeting today, I mean, if you added up how many times these high level leaders, how much time their hours are worth and how much time that meeting actually costs, it is expensive.
Yeah.
It is expensive to build connection. And yet the return on investment is there. Connection leads to financial results. If you build time to connect, then you're building and fostering trust and safety. And that is actually enabling productivity, decision-making, innovation, which leads to higher financial performance. So that's my second piece of advice is you have to embed time to connect, make time for it.
Right. Oh, I couldn't agree with you more, although I'm sure you are also pointing to research that also, backs this up. But I think many of us probably could, really testify to that as well. So take us forward. So you're teaching now, and you're working with students and doing some of your own original research still?
Well, I've so right now I'm in the middle of collecting data for my second book, which is going to be how to create a culture of connection that drives results, which is super exciting because I feel like I made my case that yes, there's a seismic shift and it's towards connection and we have to shift. But now people want to know, okay, what does that roadmap look like? How do I create an organization that has a positive culture that's based on connection? So I'm collecting data doing that. I only teach now one MBA class a semester online. And I'm an executive coach. So, and I give speeches. So I'm just loving, I feel like I'm on this mission. And I feel like this calling to really serve and to help leaders and help organizations. And I'm having a blast.
Oh, it's great. It's great. So two last questions. One is, what is the best way for somebody to find out more about your work if they want to get in touch?
Oh, I would love to hear from your listeners. Please contact me on my website. There's a contact form. Let me know. Tell me your examples and recommendations. How do you build connection at your workplace? It's michellekjohnston.com, michellekjohnston.com. So that's how you can contact me. I'd love to hear from your listeners.
That's great. And then a final question. So we also have a lot of listeners who are thinking about what might be next for them. And given that you have probably perfected, even though you said, perfection is disconnection, I would say that you have honed the art of connection. We have a number of listeners who are thinking about what's next for them in their careers, where they're going. What would be a key piece of advice that you might give to somebody who's saying, I'm okay where I am, or maybe I'm starting to get restless? What would be a key piece of advice you might give them as they're starting to think about what's next and how they should start to embark on that journey?
Yeah, it really does take a lot of intentional reflection and really thinking about what brings you the most joy. What are you passionate about? What gets you excited? I remember watching the Today Show years ago, and I don't know if it was Hoda or who was on the show that said this, but it might have even been Kathy Lee Gifford. And she said, for a lot of students in college want to figure out what is it that I'm passionate about. And they said, I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't think it's accounting or finance and economics. And she said, think about what you never wanted to go inside for, even to eat dinner. What were you doing outside that just brought you so much passion? And one of the things that I remembered was I set up a chalkboard in my basement, and whatever little kids when I was in first and second grade would come and be in my classroom, I was teaching them. I was teaching them whatever lesson I had learned that day. So education was very much a part of what I loved doing. And then there got to a point, like you were saying, some of your listeners, where I was having impact and influence, but Loyola's small. So I was having, on a good day, 25 people. And I pivoted more to I want to have more of a global impact. And so I want to deliver more keynote speeches to thousands of people, work with big companies and big conferences to get this message out. And that's why I started writing. I wanted to have more of a global impact and get my message out and help more people. So that's when I pivoted. So yeah, it's really, thinking back to what did you love doing that you didn't even want to stop doing it, and then how to pivot to really make an impact and serve others. That would be my advice.
I love that advice. Well, thank you so much for being here today. This is really, it's the work that you're doing is so important, and I think more important than ever now that we are hopefully emerging from this pandemic. And I am so excited about your next book already. So keep going.
Oh, thank you, Tammy. And thank you so much to all of your listeners. I love the work from the inside out and everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Michelle Johnston. It was really interesting to speak with her and learn about her earlier life and the transition she made going into her current work. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 224. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out: Break Through 9 Common Obstacles and Design a Career That Fulfills You. It's available in print and ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. If you were inspired by this episode with Michelle, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and please do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love to read your written review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find. Go to my website, tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. You can also help sustain this podcast by buying me a cup of coffee. Just go to buymeacupofcoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, I would appreciate your support. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.